Adam Schiff just referred to this inquiry as a vengeance campaign right in front of a vice president who dedicated his weekend to learning the names of individuals Schiff ruined on broadcast media and promptly forgot. These were not elected leaders, nor were they defense personnel, nor the usual suspects discussed on news networks for the past 7 years. These were the alternative individuals, the folks whom the public has entirely forgotten. There is the Naval Academy alumnus who never faced criminal indictment yet remains completely unemployable. There is the 3-star military commander who was forced to liquidate his family residence. There is the 28-year-old youth who spent 12 days in federal lockup simply for confusing a calendar date. Plus, there is an Ohio resident, a clerical employee earning $35,000 annually, who drained her life savings to hire an attorney just because Adam Schiff spun fictions on national television. The congressman broadcast those tales without spending a dime. All the other individuals footed the bill. Hit that like button, as you are about to witness JD Vance recite the human toll of 7 years of fabrications, name by name and dollar by dollar, directly to the politician who never took the time to calculate it. It was June 4th, 2025, inside room 226 of the Dirksen Senate Office Building. The Senate Judiciary Committee organized an inquiry regarding accountability for ethical breaches during congressional intelligence supervision, a designation crafted to appear bureaucratic, though everyone inside the Beltway understood its true purpose. Lawmakers were preparing to question Adam Schiff under penalty of perjury regarding the 7 years he dedicated to convincing the public that the American commander-in-chief acted as a foreign operative. California Democratic Senator Adam Schiff, recently sworn into the upper chamber in 2024 after transitioning from a 24-year tenure in the House, still carried the arrogance of a politician who weathered dual impeachment proceedings, a formal reprimand, and 423 television hits without once conceding a single mistake, sitting at the witness desk projecting the attitude of someone convinced he possessed the highest IQ in the room. In a lot of situations, he was actually right. Adam Schiff possessed an undeniably sharp intellect. Nobody ever disputed his mental capacity. The real issue centered around how exactly he chose to deploy that intellect. Vice President JD Vance managed the proceedings from the central chair. He kept just one plain manila envelope resting on his tabletop. It featured no vibrant sticky notes, no confidential stamps, and no theatrical gimmicks. Tucked inside that folder rested exactly 5 individual pieces of paper. Every single page displayed a specific person's name across the top. Schiff launched into his introductory remarks before the committee leader could even complete the formal welcomes. That maneuver was a classic Schiff trademark, the calculated disruption, utilizing a tone communicating that he intended to dictate the parameters of this dialogue since he had dictated the parameters of dialogue inside this Capitol for 24 years. Mr. Vice President, allow me to speak frankly. His vocal delivery was unmistakable, the exact tone that echoed throughout CNN's soundstages, MSNBC roundtables, and the House floor, maintaining the deliberate rhythm of an ex-federal litigator who never fully exited the trial environment. This proceeding has absolutely nothing to do with genuine accountability. This amounts to a vengeance campaign. He stared at Vance, not with disregard, but rather with intense scrutiny. Schiff possessed far too much cunning to underestimate an adversary he had not fully evaluated. Your commander-in-chief directed the chief law enforcement officer to probe my actions. Your executive leader declared on digital platforms, openly for the entire globe to read, that Pam Bondi ought to target Adam Schiff. Furthermore, when the professional prosecutor in Maryland informed them that insufficient proof existed to indict me, they continued to apply pressure. This hearing is purely performative, Mr. Vice President. You are functioning as the stage director, and the target demographic is an executive branch that has weaponized the Justice Department for partisan gain. He took a calculated breath, the classic litigator's hesitation. It was the specific pause intended to convey that he had delivered his argument and now he would allow it to resonate. You wish to discuss ethical breaches regarding intelligence supervision? Let us discuss a vice president answering to an executive branch that terminated agency watchdogs, dismantled intelligence bureaus, and installed a national intelligence chief whose main credential was blind devotion to a single individual. He gazed directly at the panel of lawmakers. You lack the moral authority to scold me regarding congressional oversight. You answered to the individual I attempted to bring to justice on 2 separate occasions, and I would gladly do it a 3rd time. The audience section buzzed with quiet conversation. Schiff executed his speech impeccably. His delivery was consistently perfect. Over 2 decades of repetition had refined his oratorical abilities into a tool as exact as a Swiss timepiece and as welcoming as a Swiss financial institution. One could respect the craftsmanship while simultaneously doubting every single output it generated. From the elevated platform, Vance took in the words. He offered no reaction to the Vengeance campaign comment. He offered no reaction to being labeled a stage director. He offered no reaction to the underlying suggestion that he acted as a mere subordinate. He had endured far harsher insults from his own mother during her darkest evenings, and his mother's darkest evenings were significantly more brutal than anything Adam Schiff could materialize inside a committee setting. Once Schiff concluded, Vance unsealed his file, reviewed the initial document, and locked eyes with Schiff. Senator Schiff, he stated, utilizing that consistent Midwestern cadence that never elevated and never required elevation. I appreciate your introductory remarks. I have certainly listened to stronger ones. My grandmother frequently debated the television set, and she sounded much more persuasive, yet I do value the attempt. A wave of chuckles swept the room. Vance remained completely stoic. I have no intention of discussing Russia this afternoon. Director Gabbard already exposed your records on national broadcast media. The entire nation witnessed exactly what those contained. I have no intention of discussing FISA wiretaps. Attorney General Bondi is managing that probe, and I will permit that process to unfold organically, nor will I discuss your home loan since that remains an issue between yourself and the federal prosecutor in Maryland. He glanced back down at the envelope. I intend to discuss individuals, very distinct individuals. Individuals whose identities you leveraged, whose existence you impacted, and whose professional trajectories you terminated using television interviews rather than hard proof. Individuals who bore the consequences of your fictions. Individuals to whom you have never offered an apology. Individuals you have likely erased from your memory. He flipped to the initial document. I certainly have not forgotten about them. Allow me to reacquaint you. Carter Page, Vance stated. Simply stating the identity, allowing it to linger in the chamber just like a pebble sinking into calm waters. United States Naval Academy, graduating class of 1993. He operated as a Marine intelligence specialist, subsequently employed by Merrill Lynch over in Moscow, doing so legitimately and transparently with the awareness and periodic collaboration of American intelligence networks. During 2016, he provided short-term counsel to the Trump Organization regarding energy strategy. For a brief period, he participated in a handful of discussions. He drafted a few briefing documents. He was definitely not a high-level strategist. He was entirely outside the core leadership group. He was simply an individual possessing Russian regional knowledge who freely offered a portion of his schedule. Vance locked eyes with Schiff. Yet you transformed him into the most prominently accused Russian operative within the United States. Schiff repositioned himself in his seat, nothing overly theatrical, just the subtle physical correction of a person who sensed the ground altering beneath his feet. You championed the FISA surveillance request deployed to monitor Carter Page. You appeared on broadcast networks asserting those wiretaps were legitimate, essential, and grounded on solid proof. You articulated this openly and frequently, leveraging the complete prestige of the House Intelligence Committee chairmanship. Vance flipped to another document. Inspector General Horowitz audited those exact surveillance requests and discovered 17 critical mistakes and exclusions. 17. These were not trivial administrative errors, they were critical mistakes. A federal bureau attorney named Kevin Kleinsmith confessed to manipulating documentation within the surveillance application. He tampered with an electronic message to indicate Carter Page did not operate as an informant for an alternative federal bureau, when in reality he did serve as an informant. Kleinsmith served prison time for that action. He fabricated materials to spy on a United States resident, and you actively defended the system that generated those fabricated materials. He placed the document back on the desk. Carter Page never faced a single criminal charge. Not even one. No grand jury action, no detainment, no court proceeding, no guilty verdict, absolutely zero. The individual you labeled a Russian asset during 423 broadcast interviews, and I am aware of the exact figure because somebody tallied it up, and the figure stands at 423, never faced charges for anything. Schiff leaned closer to his desk microphone. The FISA procedure received authorization from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which represents the judicial body that accepted applications holding 17 mistakes alongside manipulated materials. Vance's tone never elevated, never grew harsh, but merely flowed forward the same way a stream flows around an obstacle rather than straight through it. I have reviewed the Inspector General's findings, Senator. Every single one of the 476 pages. Have you? Schiff's jaw remained dropped for half a second. That half a second stretching between formulating a reply and recognizing the reply would fail. He shut his mouth. Carter Page remains a Naval Academy alumnus who wore this nation's uniform, Vance proceeded. At present, he remains unemployable. His reputation remains toxic, not toxic in a partisan manner, but in a literal professional manner. He submitted resumes for roles at 3 separate energy advisory agencies after the Mueller inquiry vindicated him. Every single one turned him away, not due to a lack of credentials, Naval Academy background, Merrill Lynch experience, or energy industry knowledge, but due to his internet search results. Search Carter Page online, and the initial 40 links discuss Russia, detailing a scheme he never participated in, was never indicted for, and was never convicted of. A human resources director at one of those corporations informed him privately, because nobody states this publicly, that they couldn't bring him on board since his reputation posed a risk. Our customers would notice it and immediately think about Russia. Vance allowed that reality to settle. A human resources director called him a risk. This happened not due to Carter Page's actions, but due to Adam Schiff's statements. He dedicated multiple years and hundreds of thousands of dollars toward attorney expenses to restore a reputation that you smeared on television without spending a dime. Hundreds of thousands paid by an individual employed in the corporate sector, who possessed no federal retirement fund and who lacked a partisan campaign treasury. He compensated his personal attorneys using his personal finances to demonstrate that the claims you made regarding him on CNN were completely false. Furthermore, the attorneys demonstrated it, Mueller demonstrated it, Horowitz demonstrated it, and Durham demonstrated it. Everybody demonstrated it. Yet, Carter Page remains unable to secure employment. Vance stared directly at Schiff. You leveraged his identity whenever it benefited your narrative. When the narrative collapsed, you never uttered his identity again. You avoided going on CNN to admit you made a mistake regarding Carter Page. You refused to publish a retraction. You refused to issue a solitary public declaration admitting that the individual you branded a Russian operative for 3 years was completely innocent. You simply ceased talking about him, treating him like a theatrical object you had discarded. It was identical to how an illusionist returns a bird to its container once the performance concludes. Except the bird happens to be a human being and the container happens to be a ruined livelihood. He flipped to the next document. Allow me to discuss another individual you discarded. Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, United States military. 33 years of active duty, 5 separate combat tours, and head of the Defense Intelligence Agency during the Obama administration. Vance recited the qualifications at a measured pace, not simply for dramatic effect, but to convey gravity. Every single term represented an entire year. Every single year represented a deployment, an intelligence briefing, or a choice executed at 3 a.m. inside a facility where an incorrect choice resulted in casualties. You labeled him as compromised. You labeled him a Russian operative on national television continuously, prior to the facts emerging, prior to the inquiry concluding, and while the individual retained the presumption of innocence under the legal system that you, acting as a former federal litigator, pledged to defend. Vance's tone remained steady, yet his jaw visibly clenched. It was the signature Vance indicator, the physical pivot signifying that the statements had shifted from mere facts to deep personal conviction. I spent time in the Marine Corps, Senator. Every single Marine recognizes General Flynn's identity. He commanded the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was never a partisan operative. He was a combat veteran who transitioned into the intelligence sector because he recognized, quite accurately, that intelligence operations rescue troops in active war zones. To every single Marine, every single Army soldier, and every single naval officer who served while Flynn managed the DIA, that individual remains a military brother. He stared intensely at Schiff, yet you ruined him on national television to boost your viewership. Schiff leaned closer to the microphone. General Flynn accepted a guilty plea for deceit and subsequently attempted to retract his plea. After the Bureau's internal memos, handwritten memos, Senator, the variety you cannot manufacture retroactively, proved that the investigators who questioned him never suspected he was being deceitful, Vance interjected. The investigators' internal memos stated it did not appear he was being deceitful. Those were their exact phrases written in their own penmanship. Schiff attempted a rebuttal once more. The legal proceedings? The legal proceedings concluded with executive clemency and a dismissed prosecution. Those represent the judicial realities. However, the personal realities unfolded much sooner. The personal reality remains that Michael Flynn, a 3-star commanding officer holding 33 years of military experience, liquidated his real estate. Vance let the silence hang. This is not a figure of speech. He genuinely liquidated his Virginia residence to cover attorney expenses. He accumulated those attorney expenses because you informed the nation he operated as a Russian asset long before the facts emerged. He allowed the visual to resonate, picturing a military commander signing documents at a real estate settlement, surrendering the access keys to the property where his kids matured, simply because a California representative appeared on broadcast media and painted him as an antagonist. Furthermore, it involved more than just the real estate. It involved everything connected to that real estate. The pension he secured across 33 years vanished into attorney expenses. The lecture opportunities that commanding officers secure following their service were revoked since 0 academic institutions, 0 policy organizations, and 0 businesses would schedule an individual whom Adam Schiff branded a Russian asset on nationwide broadcast. Consider the personal connections. You would be astonished by how quickly peers vanish when CNN broadcasts your portrait adjacent to the term compromised every single evening over a 2-year span. General Flynn lost more than simply a residence. He forfeited an entire existence, the existence he secured throughout 33 years of military service. Vance let the silence hang again. Furthermore, while he watched that existence slip away, you pursued an entirely different activity. You were busy inventing a conversation record. He stared directly at Schiff. In September of 2019, during the Trump and Zelensky teleconference, you recited a variation of that teleconference before the intelligence panel while being recorded on camera, operating under the authority of the panel you directed, which did not represent the genuine conversation record. You inserted phrases. You altered the tone. You fabricated an exchange that never took place. Then, once you faced exposure, once the genuine conversation record became public and everybody realized your variation was a complete fabrication, you labeled it a satirical performance. Vance shook his head slowly. A satirical performance? The head of the House Intelligence Committee invented witness statements and labeled the result a satirical performance. While Michael Flynn liquidated his residence to finance your previous fabrication, you had already started drafting the subsequent one. General Flynn liquidated his residence. You, and we will address this shortly, currently face scrutiny for manipulating paperwork regarding your own property. Vance flipped to the subsequent document. However, we will return to that subject. The following individual is George Papadopoulos. Vance delivered the identity with a distinct softness, the kind of softness kept for individuals who remain far too youthful to warrant the ordeal they endured. He was 28 years of age during 2016, a youngster, not an espionage director, and certainly not a covert agent. A youngster out of Chicago who majored in global affairs at DePaul and the University of London, who desired a career in international diplomacy the same way certain youths dream of becoming space explorers, holding a sincere conviction that the profession held value. He gazed at the panel members. 28. Keep that specific number in mind because 28 represents the period when you genuinely trust that putting in effort and obeying the regulations will guide you to your desired destination. 28 occurs before you discover that occasionally the establishment completely disregards the regulations. Occasionally, the establishment requires a target, and your identity happens to be the one it selects. Vance directed his attention back to Schiff. Papadopoulos secured a minor advisory position on the Trump Organization's International Policy Committee, a truly minor role. He represented simply one individual among dozens. He showed up to a handful of gatherings. He participated in a handful of dialogues. The Federal Bureau, as independent prosecutor Durham subsequently outlined meticulously, dispatched undercover operatives to engage him. Stefan Halper, an individual utilizing the pseudonym Azra Turk, and various others actively began the engagement. They teased discussions regarding Russian affairs. They manufactured the exact links they were supposedly probing. Durham labeled the probe's choices profoundly defective and pointed out that the Federal Bureau launched a comprehensive probe based upon the flimsiest of excuses. Vance took a brief pause. Allow me to repeat that statement. The Federal Bureau dispatched operatives toward Papadopoulos rather than the reverse. They engaged him directly. They initiated the dialogues regarding Russian affairs. Then, when he engaged in return, simply because he was 28 and enthusiastic and unaware he was being manipulated, the Federal Bureau leveraged those dialogues as the foundation for a probe. That hardly qualifies as intelligence collection. Back in Middletown, we refer to that as an entrapment scheme. Vance gave a subtle headshake, the deliberate headshake signifying that the logic failed to align and forever would fail to align. He accepted a guilty plea for delivering an inaccurate remark to the Federal Bureau regarding the schedule of a gathering, specifically the schedule, rather than the gathering's existence. He conceded the gathering took place. He simply confused the specific day. He stated it occurred prior to his campaign employment when it actually occurred after that specific day. And due to that mistake, he spent 12 days locked inside a federal penitentiary. He stared directly at Schiff. You leveraged his identity on broadcast media as evidence of a network of Russian ties. Your precise wording was network of Russian ties. A 28-year-old who confused a calendar date during an interrogation transformed, according to your narrative, into proof of a global syndicate. He lacked any legal defense account. He lacked your powerful network. He did not enjoy the backing of the Clinton Foundation, nor the California Democratic establishment funding his attorney fees. He possessed his personal savings, his family's support, and an ambition regarding public service. Vance took another pause. You transformed that ambition into a booking photograph, and you never lost a single moment of rest concerning the outcome. Schiff coughed to clear his airway. The Durham inquiry faced widespread condemnation from the exact individuals it targeted, Schiff countered. Vance nodded slowly. Indeed, lawbreakers frequently condemn the probes that ensnare them. That hardly qualifies as a novel development. Schiff's facial muscles tensed up. It was not the Vance clench which remained disciplined, but rather the Schiff clench, which signaled defensiveness. It was the physical reaction of an individual accustomed to dominating dialogues who was realizing person by person that this specific dialogue was designed to withstand his dominance. Vance moved the third document aside, lifted the fourth one, stared at it for an extended period, significantly longer than he had stared at any prior page, and when he finally vocalized his thoughts, his tone shifted entirely. It was neither amplified nor muted, but rather drawn out. It matched the tempo of an individual selecting vocabulary, the identical way a medical specialist selects their tools. Allow me to discuss an individual you are completely unfamiliar with. I have no intention of revealing her actual identity. She requested that I refrain from doing so. She remains terrified. The committee space fell completely silent. It was not the silence of expectation, but rather the silence of a crowd realizing that whatever followed would contrast sharply with whatever had occurred previously. Carter Page represented a known entity. Flynn served as a military commander. Papadopoulos appeared frequently in media reports. What followed involved an individual who never appeared in media reports and never desired such attention. I will refer to her as Jennifer. She is currently 31, having been 31 during 2018. She performed clerical tasks on a presidential operation out in Ohio. It was not an executive position, nor was it a strategic role. It was simply clerical work. She inputted identities into digital tracking grids. She managed digital contact lists. She earned $35,000 annually, which in Ohio covers the cost to lease a two-bedroom unit and nourish a single offspring, assuming you avoid dining out and purchase generic merchandise exclusively. Vance stared toward the panel members, completely ignoring Schiff, focusing entirely on the panel. He did this because Jennifer's narrative was never intended for Schiff. Schiff would forever remain incapable of grasping it. Jennifer's narrative targeted the lawmakers who employed assistants resembling Jennifer and the assistants who actually resembled Jennifer, along with the viewing public who essentially represented Jennifer. During 2018, she was served with a legal summons from the Independent Prosecutors Division. This did not occur because she committed any infractions, but simply because a digital message she handled, a single message among thousands, featured an identity that showed up on a registry that showed up in a document that showed up on Senator Schiff's broadcast segment. He let the words hang. A single message handled by a female employee earning $35,000 annually. She never drafted the content. She never even reviewed the content. She simply managed the routing. Clerical work. Yet due to that task, she received a legal summons. The committee space remained utterly motionless. A legal summons dictates that you require legal counsel. Attorneys inside the Beltway who manage federal inquiries bill somewhere between $400 and $800 per hour. Jennifer pulled in $35,000 annually. Calculate the numbers yourself. He refused to perform the calculation for the audience. He forced them to perform it themselves. He forced every single individual inside the space and every single individual watching from their living rooms to experience the crushing pressure of $400 per hour pressing down upon $35,000 annually. She blew $22,000 on attorney fees. Her complete life savings. Every single dime she had tucked away for unexpected crises, the automobile failing, the heating system breaking down, the exact events that strike individuals earning $35,000 annually who lack any financial cushions. $22,000 vanished simply to address a legal summons that led absolutely nowhere. Vance's tone lowered, never reaching a hushed tone, but settling into the frequency of an individual who refused to fake sorrow but genuinely bore its weight. Her identity never surfaced inside the Mueller findings. She never received a summons to provide verbal testimony. She never faced allegations of any kind. The legal summons received a formal reply. The attorneys received their compensation. Then the probe advanced forward. It advanced toward different identities, different digital messages, and different digital tracking grids. The probe simply ignored Jennifer, much like a hurricane ignores the residences it bypasses. He gazed down at the document. Her male child, 6 years of age, discovered her weeping at their dining table. He questioned why his mother was weeping. She replied that it was job-related matters. Because exactly how do you inform a 6-year-old that his mother is weeping because a representative from California appeared on broadcast media and spun fictions? Furthermore, those fictions launched a probe. Subsequently, that probe delivered a sheet of documentation to our residents. Ultimately, that sheet of documentation drained every single dime we managed to reserve. You never utter those words to a 6-year-old child. You simply claim it is job-related matters, then you clear your tears, and you prepare the evening meal. Vance stared at Schiff. Schiff offered absolutely no disruption. He avoided leaning closer to the desk. He refused to part his lips. He reacted this way since zero bureaucratic protests existed to counter a female weeping at her dining table. Zero judicial statutes existed to address a 6-year-old inquiring about the tears. Zero surveillance applications remained to champion. Zero Durham findings to attack. And zero impeachment traditions to reference. There was merely a female and her child, alongside $22,000 permanently erased. Meanwhile, the individual who engineered the hurricane that erased it sat a mere 6 feet distant wearing a $3,000 wardrobe. Moreover, he remained completely speechless. This represented the breaking point. Schiff's litigator tone, the tool he refined over 2 decades, the tone capable of dissecting any detail, spinning any charge, and deflecting any query, lacked any function for addressing a 6-year-old asking why his mother wept. The tone equipped to manage intelligence panels, impeachment tribunals, and television roundtables proved totally inadequate for handling Jennifer, precisely because Jennifer never represented a partisan issue. Jennifer represented a deeply personal reality, and Schiff's tool proved incapable of broadcasting personal melodies. Vance placed the 4th document downward, grabbed the 5th piece of paper, and finally gazed upon it with an emotion entirely separate from sorrow, fury, or the robotic exactness of statistics. He gazed upon it wearing the exact look his grandmother would label deeply let down. It represents the look that hurts significantly worse than fury, because fury implies somebody anticipates you fighting back, whereas feeling let down implies somebody anticipated superior behavior and suffered letdown. The final identity belongs to you, Senator. Schiff's eyelids fluttered. It marked his initial bodily response over a 10-minute span. I intend to review your economic reality adjacent to theirs, not as an assault upon you, but as a contrast, simply because the contrast conveys the narrative far better than I possibly could. He gazed at the document. However, initially, given we are discussing the associations you maintain, let us examine Ed Buck, a liberal financier. He contributed $2,700 to your election efforts. You retained those funds despite 2 fatalities, Senator. A pair of males perished from narcotic toxicity inside Ed Buck's residence. Gemmell Moore during 2017 and Timothy Dean during 2019. Buck received a guilty verdict regarding 9 severe offenses and earned a 30-year sentence inside federal lockup. Yet you retained that his contribution despite both fatalities. You refunded the cash exclusively after authorities apprehended Buck. Vance allowed that reality to settle. A pair of men perished. You retained the cash. A convicted murderer served as your financier, and you held on to his $2,700 until holding on to it transformed into a partisan disadvantage. That hardly qualifies as an administrative error. That qualifies as a deliberate strategy. He pivoted toward the economic contrast. Returning to the topic, Carter Page liquidated his residence to compensate attorneys regarding an infraction he never faced charges for. Yo, currently remain the target of a felony probe led by the Federal Prosecutors Division in Maryland concerning real estate deceit, specifically for supposedly manipulating financial paperwork and real estate records to secure superior financing conditions regarding your residence located in Potomac. A residence you declared as your main dwelling while concurrently declaring a unit in Burbank, California as your main dwelling. The Federal Housing Finance Agency forwarded a criminal referral directly to the Justice Department, noting potential breaches involving electronic deceit, postal deceit, financial deceit, and inaccurate declarations provided to banking entities. He allowed that reality to settle. An individual liquidated his residence due to your statements. You currently face a probe regarding deceit surrounding your own property. Vance pivoted to the subsequent contrast. General Flynn forfeited his pension revenue. He liquidated the residence where he nurtured his kids to cover attorney expenses generated because you informed the nation he operated as a Russian operative. You, Senator, maintain a legal defense account. It holds $1.2 million according to the latest documentation. It features 400 backers, partisan action committees, and a Native American tribe. $1.2 million exists simply to compensate your legal team. He stared directly at Schiff. General Flynn lacked any legal defense account. He possessed a retirement package he secured across 33 years and a residence he completely owned. He forfeited everything. You possess $1.2 million contributed by individuals who expect partisan favors in return. I presume that highlights the distinctions separating a military commander and a lawmaker. He pivoted to the concluding contrast. Jennifer dropped $22,000 representing her complete life savings. She lacked any partisan committees. She lacked any major financiers. She lacked any political organizations distributing funds. She possessed a reserve account alongside a transaction account and a 6-year-old child. $22,000 simply vanished. Vance shut the envelope. He moved it out of the way. He clasped his fingers together. You spun fictions for 7 solid years, Senator. 423 television hits. Furthermore, those fictions stripped Carter Page of his profession, stripped General Flynn of his residence, stripped George Papadopoulos of 12 Days of Liberty along with his entire destiny. They stripped Jennifer of $22,000 alongside her child's feeling of security, and they stripped you of absolutely nothing. He took a pause. Absolutely nothing. The phrase hung over the committee space acting like a final judgment. Up to this moment, they stripped you of absolutely nothing. You appeared on broadcast media. You shared your fictions. You returned safely to your residence located in Potomac, the specific one you potentially used deceit to acquire. You secured $1.2 million for your legal defense. You secured a victory for the upper chamber. You took a seat inside this facility acting as a peer, while the individuals whose realities your fictions ruined returned to their dining tables, dealing with liquidated properties and attorney invoices and 6-year-olds demanding explanations they never should have needed to demand. He stared at the panel members. Exactly 3 weeks prior, Senator Schiff appeared on Meet the Press declaring his opposition to allocating citizen tax dollars toward Justice Department probes. Exactly 3 weeks prior. Vance shook his head, the slow, sorrowful headshake. The individual who dedicated 7 years demanding citizen-financed probes regarding a chief executive currently opposes citizen-financed probes. The singular factor that shifted involves the identity of the person facing the probe. Vance rose to his feet the exact manner he consistently rose near the conclusion, at a deliberate pace. The manner an individual rises when the physical act carries weight. It was not an aggressive dominance tactic. It represented a conclusion. Senator Schiff, I possess a single inquiry. It has nothing to do with Russia, nothing to do with FISA, nothing to do with real estate deceit, and nothing to do with your legal defense account. A single personal inquiry. He stared at Schiff, maintaining direct eye contact. The physical gap separating the committee leader's platform and the testimony desk spanned 12 feet. Yet those 12 feet represented the most massive gap inside the entire space. Have you ever apologized to Carter Page? Absolute silence. 1 tick, 2 ticks. Have you ever contacted Michael Flynn, the individual who liquidated his residence due to your broadcast media appearances, and stated you deeply regretted calling him a Russian operative prior to the facts emerging? 3 seconds elapsed. 4 seconds. Have you ever reached out to George Papadopoulos, who remained 28 years of age, who harbored an ambition concerning public service, whose identity you leveraged as a discussion point on CNN, and stated you were sorry? 5 seconds elapsed. 6 seconds. Have you ever considered Jennifer? Vance's tone hovered scarcely over a hush at this stage, leaving the amplification system to handle the heavy lifting his vocal cords refused to perform. Or the numerous individuals mirroring her situation, the clerical employees, the unpaid helpers, the junior assistants who drain their financial reserves on attorneys simply because your fictions on broadcast media transform their mundane duties into federal inquiries? Have you ever considered their existence in any capacity? 7, 8, 9, 10. Schiff remained seated at the testimony desk. His palms rested entirely flat against the tabletop. They were the palms of an individual possessing nothing to grasp, possessing nothing to wave around, and possessing absolutely nothing to perform. His physical alignment remained flawless. Over 2 decades of committee sessions had conditioned his backbone to remain perfectly vertical regardless of the situation, yet the absolute flawlessness served as the indicator. Whenever an individual genuinely feels at ease, they adjust their position, they tweak their posture, they physically shift. Schiff refused to shift. He maintained his frozen state the identical way an individual maintains a frozen state when any slight shift might signal guilt. His lips remained sealed, not the strategic seal of an individual picking the perfect opening, but the seal of an individual who faced a query that is 2 decades inside the Capitol, his legal education from Stanford, his tenure as a federal litigator, and his 423 broadcast media hits failed to equip him to address. Positioned behind Schiff, his staffer, a veteran policy advisor, a female who supported him since the early House era and witnessed him navigate every variety of partisan assault, stared directly down at her own palms. She refused to look at Schiff or Vance, focusing solely upon her personal palms. It was the exact manner you stare at your palms when you find yourself incapable of staring at anything else, since staring anywhere else equates to acknowledging the reality unfolding directly ahead of you. Furthermore, the reality unfolding directly ahead of you features your supervisor proving incapable of addressing a query that a toddler could easily address, solely because the query remained devoid of legal mechanics, it remained devoid of partisan maneuvering, it remained devoid of bureaucratic procedure, it remained an entirely ethical matter. Have you ever apologized? Moreover, the response, the truthful response, the response that every single individual inside the space and every single individual watching from their living rooms previously understood remained negative. He possessed zero history of apologizing to any individual regarding any matter across 24 years, not concerning the Russian allegations that Mueller failed to corroborate, not concerning the FISA justifications that Horowitz tore apart, not concerning the satirical conversation record he invented, not concerning Carter Page, not concerning Flynn, not concerning Papadopoulos, not concerning Jennifer. Plus, vocalizing negative out loud inside an upper chamber committee space directly toward the face of an executive leader who literally just recited the identities of the individuals who warranted that exact apology represented an action Adam Schiff's tool simply failed to execute. The tool capable of navigating anything, including impeachments, reprimands, broadcast media traps, and adversarial panels, failed completely to navigate negative whenever the query centered on expressing regret. 11 ticks. 12. Vance offered a nod, the specific nod of an individual who secured his reply. Furthermore, the reply remained absolute quiet, and the absolute quiet rang significantly louder than anything Schiff articulated throughout 2 decades. I assumed exactly as much. Vance's tone remained perfectly even. It was neither furious nor sorrowful. It was perfectly even, possessing the evenness of a reality that requires zero embellishment. Because the individuals who broadcast fictions from network sets rarely consider the individuals those fictions crash down upon. You took a seat beneath network spotlights and convinced the nation that Carter Page operated as an espionage agent. You took a seat inside that identical spot and convinced the nation that Michael Flynn functioned as a compromised asset. You took a seat right there and spun George Papadopoulos into a syndicate that completely failed to materialize. Subsequently, you simply returned to your property. You returned safely to Potomac. You returned to your legal defense account alongside your upper chamber election effort alongside your publishing contract. He retrieved the thin envelope displaying 5 sheets of paper highlighting 5 identities. The fictions came free of charge for you, Senator. They stripped everybody else of absolutely everything. He reclaimed his seat, struck the mallet to pause the proceedings, and during the quiet following the strike, a quiet that stretched significantly further than normal since the panel representatives refused to shift and the audience refused to shift and even the staffers refused to shift, Adam Schiff remained seated at the testimony desk, keeping his palms perfectly flat against the timber and his lips entirely sealed, mimicking the posture of an individual who dedicated 2 decades to speaking, yet eventually faced the solitary query that speaking proved incapable of resolving. The media segment that gained viral status initially failed to match anyone's expectations. It failed to highlight Carter Page never facing charges, although that specific segment pulled in 14 million streams. It failed to highlight Flynn liquidating his residence, although that distinct moment transformed into the most circulated segment across Facebook among military circles, where it circulated adjacent to pictures of Flynn wearing his uniform alongside the solitary term betrayed. It failed to even feature the 28-year-old harboring an ambition. The quote stating you transformed his situation into a booking photograph failed to peak early, although that distinct phrase echoed across every single university ground in the nation for an entire week, since every 20-something who previously harbored an ambition concerning public service recognized a piece of themselves inside George Papadopoulos and subsequently trembled. The media segment that gained viral status initially centered entirely on Jennifer. Her male child questioned why his mother was weeping at their dining table. He remained 6 years of age. It totaled exactly 22 terms. The video segment lasted exactly 44 ticks. It showcased Vance narrating Jennifer's reality, spanning from she earned $35,000 annually all the way toward you simply claim it is job-related matters, then you clear your tears and you prepare the evening meal, 44 ticks. It hit 47 million streams across 3 24-hour cycles. It saw circulation from caregivers, from solo mothers, from individuals who dealt with legal summons, from individuals who never dealt with legal summons, yet recognized exactly what $22,000 signified, from individuals raising 6-year-olds, and from individuals who used to be 6-year-olds demanding to know why the adults kept weeping. It saw circulation simply because it resonated as genuine. It was not literally genuine. Jennifer served as an amalgamation, a substitute representing the numerous actual individuals whose identities Vance shielded, yet it remained psychologically genuine and experientially genuine. It represented the genuine reality of a female positioned at a dining table, the genuine reality of a kid's inquiry, and the genuine reality of $22,000 evaporating simply because a male resident of California broadcast fictions on television. The Flynn liquidated his residence juxtaposed against Schiff-used deceit regarding his residence contrast transformed into the runner-up viral instance. Somebody generated a side-by-side visual display. Flynn's liquidated Virginia property occupied the left margin, while Schiff's Potomac real estate occupied the right margin, featuring the tagline explaining one liquidated his residence to cover a felony he never committed. The alternate faces a probe regarding deceit surrounding his property. The visual display saw circulation 2.4 million times. Right-leaning media platforms dubbed it the property contrast. Left-leaning media platforms labeled it deceptive since Schiff remained unindicted. Both classifications held technical accuracy. Neither classification encapsulated what genuinely made the visual display so ruinous: the optical impact of dual properties sitting side by side, one surrendered and one supposedly obtained through deceit, tethered together by identical vocal fictions. The "Have you ever expressed regret?" query birthed the social media tag "Say you are sorry," which dominated discussions for 48 solid hours. Citizens uploaded recordings demanding to know whether their specific elected officials ever expressed regret regarding anything whatsoever. The majority never had. The social media tag lacked any partisan angle. It remained fundamentally human. True responsibility completely lacks partisan affiliation. The judicial ramifications materialized rapidly. The real estate deceit probe secured fresh public scrutiny. The liquidated his residence versus used deceit regarding his residence contrast generated immense partisan heat upon the federal prosecutor in Maryland to advance the case or openly clarify the holdup. Schiff's legal defense account experienced a surge concerning contributions, jumping from $1.2 million toward $1.8 million inside a 2-week window, yet adversarial fundraising efforts tripled. The California conservative establishment mailed a flyer directly to every enrolled ballot caster inside the territory. Adam Schiff secured $1.8 million covering his attorneys. Carter Page liquidated his residence. Who genuinely represents the casualty? Carter Page, utilizing his legal counsel, declared a private litigation effort examining allegations aimed at Schiff, resting on the premise that his broadcast media appearances, executed beyond the parameters of congressional duties, lacked the shield of lawmaker immunity. Judicial experts branded the litigation unprecedented yet hardly baseless. Schiff's media representative branded it as simply another illustration highlighting Trump's vengeance apparatus. The litigation entered the system inside the Eastern District of Virginia, the case reference code transformed into an automobile decal. Directly on the upper chamber floor, 3 conservative lawmakers pitched a measure demanding Schiff's formal reprimand inside the upper chamber, which stood to render him the initial congressional representative reprimanded across both legislative bodies. The lower chamber formally reprimanded him during June 2023, utilizing a tally of 213 against 209 due to deceiving the American public. The upper chamber measure referenced a sequence of broadcast remarks that inflicted verifiable damage upon ordinary citizens who completely avoided criminal indictments. It secured 31 joint backers. It required 67 affirmative tallies to clear the floor. It failed to clear the floor, yet 31 remained a figure that trailed Schiff inside every single space throughout the remainder of the legislative term. 31 lawmakers who reviewed the identities, reviewed the proof, and attached their signatures onto a record declaring that the fictions you broadcast carried ramifications, and those ramifications demand recognition. Schiff's media representative published a formal declaration. This represents an extension of the partisan-driven assaults aimed at Senator Schiff from an executive branch that aims to silence its detractors. The formal declaration deployed the term silence precisely 3 separate instances. It completely avoided deploying the terms Carter Page, Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, or apologize. The quietness embedded inside the formal declaration rang significantly louder than the quietness inside the committee space. Dorothy Chen rested at her workstation situated on the 3rd floor of the Hart Senate office building, the identical facility where she previously monitored Tulsi Gabbard unseal Adam Schiff's records 4 months prior. It was the identical workstation and the identical beverage cup, specifically the one sporting the damaged grip that she retained simply because her mother gifted it to her the exact day she commenced her employment. It featured the identical vantage point of the corridor where lawmakers strolled past without even registering the 27-year-old who composed their briefing documents. She monitored Tulsi's session via her mobile device tucked between tasks during hijacked moments. She monitored Tulsi unseal the vibrant envelopes, review the restricted proof, and demonstrate systematically, clinically, and ruthlessly that Schiff engaged in deception. Presently, she was monitoring Vance's session. It was a separate monitor, utilizing the workspace television this round since her supervisor decided to watch as well. Furthermore, whenever the supervisor decides to watch, the entire team decides to watch. It generated a separate sensation entirely. Tulsi displayed the proof, the envelopes, the files, and the digital footprints. Tulsi demonstrated that Schiff engaged in deception. That aspect proved critical. That aspect proved essential. That aspect served as the groundwork. Vance displayed the human beings, avoiding the paperwork, avoiding the restricted files, and focusing entirely on identities. Carter Page finding himself unable to secure employment. Michael Flynn liquidating his residence. George Papadopoulos, who happened to be 28. Jennifer, who blew $22,000 and possessed a 6-year-old child. Dorothy rested her beverage cup down. The envelopes demonstrated that he engaged in deception. The identities demonstrated that the deception carried massive weight. She considered her personal compensation package, specifically $52,000. It was barely a bump above what Jennifer earned. She considered exactly what might transpire assuming a legal summons landed directly on her workstation, not concerning an action she orchestrated, but concerning an item she routed. She considered the $22,000 figure. She considered whether she possessed $22,000. She absolutely did not. Dorothy lifted her beverage cup, consumed a swallow, and stared directly toward the television where Schiff remained seated quietly, keeping his palms utterly flat upon the tabletop and his lips entirely sealed. "That accurately depicts the visual," she murmured softly, "when the vocabulary simply depletes." Marcus Webb sat inside his pickup positioned in the parking sector of a Lowe's located on East Broad Street over in Columbus, Ohio, at precisely 6:23 in the evening following the conclusion of his workday. His palms remained coated with plasterboard residue, specifically the variety of residue that burrows directly into the wrinkles spanning your joints and lingers there right up until the subsequent bathing session, given that the initial bathing session only handles the top layer. Furthermore, tradesmen understand that the top layer never represents the complete task. His mobile device leaned directly against the driving wheel. It played the Vance segment, specifically the Jennifer portion. Marcus stood at 44 years of age. He operated as an electrician starting at age 20. He secured an apprenticeship at 18, secured journeyman status at 22, and secured his master's certification at 28. He completely avoided participating in partisan affairs. He entirely lacked the desire to do so. However, during 2016, he donated his time toward Trump's operation across a pair of weekends spanning October, representing the final sprint prior to the ballot casting. He planted lawn placards and tapped on front doors, representing minor efforts completely devoid of secrecy. He held conviction regarding a cause and simply made an appearance. That represented the entirety of it. During 2018, he collected a document, technically not a legal summons, but a formal document shipped from a legal agency operating on behalf of the House Intelligence Committee. The document asked for any correspondence tied to his unpaid efforts backing the 2016 presidential operation. Marcus lacked the knowledge to distinguish between a standard document and a legal summons. He operated as a tradesman. He understood the distinctions separating 120 and 240 voltage levels. He understood the distinctions separating insulated wire and protective casing. He totally failed to understand the distinctions separating a legislative inquiry and a judicial mandate. Consequently, he retained a legal counselor, precisely because that remains the exact protocol whenever you collect a document originating from the Capitol that you fail to comprehend. You retain an individual who comprehends it. The legal counselor operated out of Columbus rather than Washington. Marcus lacked the funds for Washington rates. Columbus billed at $200 per hour. The legal counselor reviewed the document, executed a pair of teleconference calls, authored a single-page reply, and invoiced Marcus $3,200. $3,200. That constituted Marcus's emergency reserve. He built it over 6 full years, depositing $50 per instance. With every single pay period, $50 dropped directly into a reserve account that Marcus rigorously avoided accessing. It was not intended for holidays, not intended for fresh equipment, and not intended for anything besides the specific variety of crisis that tradesmen understand constantly looms over the horizon. It covered the pickup failing, the sluggish season whenever construction halts, the physical damage that removes you from the site for 6 full weeks, and the compensation check that finally drops 4 weeks subsequent to the leasing due date. $3,200 representing 6 solid years completely vanished due to a single-page document that declared Mr. Webb holds no correspondence relevant to your inquiry and triggered 0 subsequent action. Nobody placed a call, nobody shipped a reply, nobody tied to the House Intelligence Committee or the Independent Prosecutors Division or any alternative bureau ever reached out to Marcus Webb moving forward. He planted lawn placards and tapped on front doors. Yet the effort invoiced him $3,200 simply to confirm that planting lawn placards avoided criminal classification. Marcus monitored the Vance segment and listened to the Jennifer portion. $22,000, the dining table, the 6-year-old child. Marcus lacked a 6-year-old child. He possessed a canine, a blonde retriever answering to Biscuit, who rested inside the passenger chair of the pickup and failed to comprehend partisan affairs but successfully comprehended that whenever Marcus maintained silence for an extended period, an issue existed. "I planted lawn placards," Marcus stated aloud to Biscuit. "Lawn placards across weekends, and the effort invoiced me $3,200 simply to confirm that avoided criminal classification." Biscuit stared back at Marcus. Biscuit lacked the capacity to grasp what $3,200 signified. Biscuit simply grasped that Marcus's tone remained muted, his palms remained frozen, the pickup avoided motion, and that specific combination signified they avoided heading toward the residence just yet. 6 solid years dedicated to banking $50 per instance. Marcus stared directly at his own palms. Plasterboard residue packed the wrinkles belonging to the palms of an individual who labored using his palms, banked funds using his palms, and forfeited his banked funds simply because a lawmaker residing in California broadcast fictions on television concerning an operation that Marcus aided across a pair of weekends by planting placards. He cranked the pickup engine and navigated toward the residence. Biscuit occupied the passenger side, pressing his snout directly against the glass pane, observing Columbus pass alongside the activating avenue illuminations, the Lowe's display blurring out via the reflection device, and the lawn placards resting upon grass plots pushing candidates that Marcus refused to ever support with his time moving forward. He refused not because he abandoned conviction, but specifically because maintaining conviction invoiced him $3,200, plus 6 solid years. Marcus launched a fresh emergency reserve the very month following the legal counselor's invoice. He used the identical financial institution, Huntington, situated on East Main. He used the identical account category offering minimal yields alongside 0 baseline thresholds, representing the exact variety financial institutions provide toward individuals who lack the resources to access superior options. He deposited the identical $50 per pay period. He hit the 3-year mark currently, holding $3,900, representing an increase over the previous run. Yet the reserve carried a disparate sensation entirely. The initial reserve rested firmly upon confidence. Confidence implying banking funds carried genuine worth. Confidence implying crises remained uncommon, and confidence implying the establishment refused to pierce into an individual's reality, covering the offense of planting lawn placards across a pair of October weekends. The fresh reserve rested firmly upon realization, the realization asserting that a document dispatched from the Capitol could land at any residence across any moment concerning any justification or entirely lacking any justification whatsoever. Furthermore, the singular defense mechanism remained $50 per pay period, every single pay period until the end of time. Biscuit forced his snout firmly against the glass pane. Marcus navigated the roads. The plasterboard residue embedded itself further down within his joints. He dubbed it a vengeance campaign. Vance dubbed it an attendance check. Carter Page, representing the Naval Academy, dodging charges entirely, yet failing to secure employment. Michael Flynn, holding 3 stars spanning 33 years and liquidating his residence. George Papadopoulos, resting at 28 years of age, pulling 12 days inside lockup. An ambition transformed straight into a booking photograph. Jennifer, earning $35,000 annually while burning $22,000 covering legal expenses. A 6-year-old child demanding to know why his mother remained weeping. Additionally, Adam Schiff sitting on a property facing a probe retaining $2,700 collected from a convicted murderer, generating a fabricated conversation record he dubbed a satirical performance, managing a $1.2 million legal defense account, and offering absolutely 0 apologies. Heaven favor Dorothy Chen, the individual who grasped that the envelopes demonstrated he engaged in deception, while the identities demonstrated the deception carried massive weight. Heaven favor Marcus Webb, the individual who planted lawn placards across a pair of October weekends and burned 6 solid years banking $50 increments to discover that engaging within the Republic carries an invoice whenever somebody broadcasting on television determines your selected operation represents a syndicate. Heaven favor Biscuit, the canine who completely fails to comprehend partisan affairs yet perfectly comprehends whenever Marcus remains silent for an excessive period. 423 broadcast media hits, absolute zero indictments levied against the individuals he targeted, $22,000 stripped from a female who pulled in $35,000, $3,200 stripped from a male who banked $50 per instance, a residence liquidated by a military commander, a profession ruined for a Naval Academy alumnus, the ambition of a 28-year-old transformed straight into a booking photograph. Furthermore, one query, a singular rudimentary personal query, that the absolute sharpest orator inside the United States Senate completely failed to address throughout 12 seconds of absolute quiet. Have you ever stated your